Alice,
Here.
Barnes,
Present.
Lewis,
Here.
Gorman,
Here.
Kaiser,
Here.
Krautkramer,
Here.
Steele,
Present.
Tomcheck,
Oh.
Zebro,
Yes.
Student Rep Carly. All present but student rep.
Okay. Item number 3 is the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is in the front of the room near the projector.
Okay.
Please join us. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 4 is the approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
they meant that we have a guest here, our attorney, Mr. Dietrich, but asked that we modify the agenda to allow him to be heard.
In front of the public forum, Corey? We'll move it after the public forum to item number 7.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the board? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Item number 5 is the approval of the minutes from the regular board meeting, Board of Education meeting on December 19th, 2017.
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes from Tuesday, December 19th.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes as presented from the December 19th meeting. Further discussion from the board? Further discussion from the board? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I'll abstain.
I'll need to abstain too.
Motion carries. Item number 6 is the public forum. The public forum provides the public with the opportunity to ask questions about or address issues included on the school board meeting agenda. General operating rules of the public forum will be determined by the board president once the number of people wishing to speak is identified on the night of the meeting. Prior to addressing the board, please clearly state your name and address. Is there anyone in the audience this evening that would like to address the board? I don't see anybody, but I'll ask a second time. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the board? Seeing no hands, we'll move on to item number 7, which will be our discussion. Where is it? Number 10, new business. Discussion with Attorney Dietrich on our Mosinee School District Policy 5610, Mosinee School District Policy 5530, and Mosinee School District Policy 5500.
I want to thank the board, first of all, by adjusting your agenda. Quite honestly, based upon the walking that I did around to several buildings, I'm not sure where my car is parked anymore. And, it's going to take me a little while to find my car. I was asked to come and talk with you as a board regarding some of your board policies, and particularly as they relate to and focus upon student expulsion proceedings. And the Mosinee School District has had a number of student conduct issues that have had to be addressed by the board over the course of the last, I'm going to really say year, because there were certainly things that have been done in the past. And the question that I've had discussions with Dr. Schultz and with Kevin Terry from my office relate to whether there are alternate procedures available to the board in dealing with these student expulsions. And there are really 3 alternatives available to the board when dealing with student expulsions. Alternative number 1 is your current process, where proceedings are brought through a rather formal statutory process to hear and consider whether or not there has been a violation of school rules and whether or not there should be action taken in the form of some sort of student discipline and or expulsion. Option number 2 is for the school district to hire what is called an independent hearing officer. And an independent hearing officer engages in the hearing process that you as a board do and makes a recommendation to you as the board for you to consider at a subsequent meeting after the hearing. The value of that particular process is you're not having to obviously sit through a full hearing process. And quite often it is someone who has legal training or background that can do the hearings, give the various due process, and give a recommendation up to the board based upon the hearing. I'm not sure, speaking candidly, I'm not sure that the Mosinee School District has that much in the way of student conduct issues to warrant that alternative, but it is an alternative that is available. I formerly served for about 5 years as the independent hearing officer for the Middleton Cross Plains School District. And they had a great deal of activity in the area of student expulsions, and so I was spending amounts of time down in the Madison area doing those hearings. It is an alternative that is available under the state statutes. The third, yes.
Sorry, just a question for you. It sounds like if we hire somebody, it's still coming to the board and we're still making the decision anyway?
You would ultimately be making the decision. It is typically a acceptance or not acceptance of the recommendation from the independent hearing officer. And typically when you go down that path and use that procedure, for the most part, you're going to accept that recommendation unless it's really off to the side. Many of the issues that I faced were weapons issues in that particular school district, so it required a lot of processes of things. The third alternative is to, yes, I'm
Just
sorry.
a quick question before you move on. Would the district still have legal representation similar to the expulsion hearings we've been present in, plus a hearing officer, or does the hearing officer play both roles during the hearing?
No, the hearing officer can't play both roles because it's an independent hearing officer. In the majority of cases, yes, the district would have counsel that presents the case to the independent hearing officer. As I think has occurred in the Mosinee School District, quite often there is not counsel on the other side, and the independent hearing officer engages in a lot of creating a record and sometimes really helping and walking through the process with the unrepresented parents / student. But typically there is an attorney that presents the case with administration.
Thank you.
Wouldn't have to have that. The third alternative is to engage in what has been called many different things, but really it's a pre-expulsion review process. And I've sent you various sets of materials. I'm not going to walk through all those materials. I want to make some comments about this and then kind of work into a last area. Using the pre-expulsion process, as you see in the materials, there's kind of a checklist of what needs to be done. There's a communication between administration and the parents and student. There's typically a meeting held where there's a discussion, a pretty frank discussion about what was the conduct what were we dealing with, what has transpired. And in many cases, there is an agreement reached that there's going to be a level of discipline or sanctions issued to that student. And in effect, you enter into kind of a contract. This is what the student's going to do, this is what the school district is going to do, and that's how you're going to impose the sanctions or the discipline based on the student conduct. The important piece of it, from your perspective, as you see in some of the policies that I sent to you, is that the board has an opportunity before this process is implemented to give guidance to administration as to some of the different severities of the conduct. And that's where the board gets to act as the representative of the community to determine where that level of conduct warrants certain levels of discipline in order to kind of set the stage then for in effect, it's like a mediated discussion of this is how we're going to handle the student conduct suspension, expulsion, whatever it may be. One of the values to considering this alternative is the balancing act that you have to do, and the balancing act that administration has to do between expectations and properly addressing inappropriate conduct in the school setting, and the focus on educating students. I will tell you, as an independent hearing officer, making recommendations to a school board on what should be done, that's a very challenging balance. In many instances, the denial of any type of an educational service or program to a student is really setting up that student for a great deal of failure. I don't envy you having to make that balance. But in many instances, it's valuable for the administration to be working with the student and the parents and other educators as to what are the appropriate services that perhaps can be provided, but at the same time recognizing the need for exercising control over what happens in the school setting, in the educational setting, classroom setting, that type of thing. So we are seeing more and more school districts go to this type of process to basically have the considerations of student conduct addressed in a pre-expulsion type of process. If that process is not successful, then you go forward with a traditional expulsion process. Again, the role of the board is to give guidance and direction to the administration on what I'm going to use as simple words, the severity of the discipline for the conduct involved. In the policy materials that I sent to you, you saw quite a long laundry list of different things. I don't know that it's necessary to go into that great a detail. But that's a very nice checklist for you to look at, to consider what do we think should be the appropriate level of consideration by the administration. I want to step away a minute, if I can address a little bit more about your current policies. Particularly your current policies regarding student code of conduct and even more importantly, alcohol and controlled substances. I want you to know, and I suspect you do, but I want you to know that the whole concept of zero tolerance is part of a national debate in the school law arena as to whether or not the implementation of a zero tolerance policy is the right thing to do in an educational setting. I don't have an opinion, because to some degree, a determination of how much of a zero tolerance policy you're going to implement is a community standard. And I think being, let's just say being biased, I spent most of my life in central and northern Wisconsin. I think we in central and northern Wisconsin are hard on it. I think we're tough on it. And I don't know that I could say that that's good or bad. I think I see more and more in what I'm going to characterize as the suburbs of Milwaukee, the desire to be more flexible as it relates to zero tolerance. I think that there can be some consideration that there are certainly educational issues in those environments that need to be addressed. But I want to just make you aware and let you know that this is a matter of constant discussion, both on the school law listservs that I'm on, as well as on the National School Attorneys website, that whether or not the implementation and the continued enforcement of zero tolerance is ultimately the right thing or not for an educational environment. Again, my reaction is that it is to a great degree a community analysis in a community setting that needs to make that decision. But it is certainly something that is getting a lot of topical discussion and debate, especially amongst the school lawyers. So those were kind of the comments I wanted to present as a starting point. I'd like to answer any questions that the board may have. It is my understanding that, you know, the board at this juncture is looking for what are the alternatives, and are those alternatives the right thing for the Mosinee School District. And again, you traditionally follow the hearing process. We have tried to do those as informally as possible, because it plays best for, I think, everyone in attendance. You could proceed with hiring an independent hearing officer to handle those cases, make a recommendation to you. It's up to you. You have the right to go outside of that recommendation at any point in time. Or develop more of a pre-expulsion process and a pre-expulsion policy. I'm not bringing to you a specific policy to recommend to you. I'd be more than happy to work with administration and present that to you if that's a route you want to go. Some of the materials I provided give you kind of an idea of how it is implemented rather than necessarily the policy statement. Before I take questions, I did want to take the opportunity to advise the whole board that my associate, or the associate at Root Aware, Kevin Terry, has resigned from his position at Root Aware. He will be leaving the area for Milwaukee. I will be pretty much active in everything that's happening here at Mosinee School District, but I will be the lead contact for all matters regarding the Mosinee School District. He thanks you for the opportunity to work with him. His wife is pregnant, and they're hope that they'll have their first child sometime in early fall, and they're going to Milwaukee where it's closer to family. So that's the primary focus of that. Kevin is a friend of mine. I hate to see him leave, but we're leaving on good terms and that type of thing. So I'll take questions.
I actually have a question for Dr. Schultz. With the information that Mr. Dietrich provided, and keeping in mind that we've hired Neola to do our board policy procedures, does any of this stuff align with any examples that Neola had, or have we looked down that road at all?
We have, so the pre-expulsion process, Neola would be able to review and share that type of a policy. I think we saw it in an example of Reedsburg, that Reedsburg policy. So in the options that Dean just outlined, it would be a policy to support option 3, which is to develop a policy for pre-expulsion process.
I actually have the Neola policy, but I didn't send it
I think that's
along.
5610, I think
Yeah.
that's a Reedsburg policy.
Yeah, that's right.
Am I incorrect, and could not we put a policy together that we all agree on?
Absolutely.
That's what I thought. We don't
Yeah.
have to go with one particular.
Well, Neola, all of our policies are, we hire Neola to write and to go through all of our policies because they have a
Right.
team that does that. So if I brought to them X, Y, or Z, they would say to me, here's several examples for that type of a policy.
And wouldn't we want to look maybe like we did years ago, in creating a committee to look at our code of conduct book for the high school, the extracurricular, to make sure everything ties in with that policy as well? So we could get maybe the community involvement at that time and people from the school and board members all in before we do that. Would that be a good road to go down?
Particularly if you're going to set up, the board believes is kind of the guidelines for discipline. That'd be a very appropriate way to do it. I don't know how much, my initial reaction is I would give some members of the community the opportunity to comment, but it is a very much a board kind of analysis and balancing act, so to speak.
Might outline a thing similar to this 5610, you kind of take a look at that. And I think the example this policy example that you gave, I don't see a Neola reference, but I'm guessing they have one. And I'm guessing that they have one.
Can you just clarify for me, one of the things you said is in option 3, with the pre-expulsion, that there's an opportunity for evaluation and guidance from the board, but that's all, correct me if I'm wrong, that's pre-expulsion?
Right.
So we're gonna look at some different ranges of infractions or violations of our policy or code of conduct and give the administration a range of discipline for, almost like the level of a felony, is it an H felony, an I felony, so that if it falls in this category, here's what our expectations are, and then the administration that works with those expectations to negotiate a settlement.
Right. And the last part of the very longer document is kind of the laundry list that was developed. I'm not pulling right off the top of my head the district that's involved. I think it is, yeah. Beloit, this is Beloit. And that, as I said, I think that's a hugely detailed listing. I don't know if we need to go through all of that, but it gives you kind of the concept of gradations, so to speak.
Right, because there was I think 26 pages.
Right.
And what I took from, there's some, you might want to take a little bit from one and do another. You don't have to adopt Richmond's policy. You can put into place your policy with the way you as a district want to proceed with this. Right, and it wouldn't take, we've done it, we sat and did like, Corey said, all of the other ones, so if we
Yeah,
have
and
any
you would start
questions,
with
or any tweaking of it,
That's not what I meant. I wanted to know what Neola had. If we can do,
Yeah.
what I hear you saying, Kelly, I don't know if I'm hearing you accurately, but you're saying that this body would put together the verbiage that would constitute or make up a
I'm saying
policy.
we can, I'm saying we don't have to.
I agree that we can.
Mhm.
My position on that would be, whatever we do, Neola's lawyers,
Right,
Approve it.
definitely, yep.
I don't want to give up.
Yes, and
Start.
start with them.
Well,
I
that
think
would be
they-
my point, that's why I
Yeah.
brought it up. I'd start with them before we start
Right, right.
Yeah,
meatballing it together.
yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about results? The zero tolerance that you brought forth, results with districts in the state, I believe there's some data here, versus the second chance strategy. Could you share any interpretations and wisdom, but honestly, in that regard?
I'm only smiling because as I catalog 40 years of doing this, the world continues to change. And the zero tolerance things that I saw 15 years ago, particularly where it related to drugs, lesser drugs, marijuana, that type of thing. That world is changing. Just last week, the federal court in Illinois ordered an Illinois school district to allow a student to come to school every day with a patch and oil, medical marijuana patch and oil, to assist that student in dealing with seizures she experienced. Now, we go down that path. There's a lot of medical components to stuff like that, but we're certainly dealing on a national level, not so much in Wisconsin yet, but national level with, the recreational marijuana in the workplace, and how do you deal with that type of thing. So I think zero tolerance and the second chance opportunity as it relates to certain types of drug usage, possession, and stuff like that is something that really has to be looked at. The weapon issue is a different issue, and I think, I think zero tolerance for a weapon issue is, for the most part, a proper methodology. Although there are cases that you've all read about of a kindergartner, with a very small penknife being expelled under a zero tolerance rule. Well, you start to wonder about some of that too. But gradations and the movements that we're dealing with today, bullying. It's hard for bullying to be implemented under a zero tolerance rule because the definition and the occurrences are hard to discern and hard to determine whether something happened. But certainly we're seeing more and more studies that talk about the significant impact of those types of conduct on young children. So zero tolerance is not gone. I think it's looked at differently based on different conducts. And that's a challenge, and that's what I like about the process here is I think the debate about zero tolerance and the debate about what level of discipline should be imposed under certain circumstances is a wonderful way for you to do your job. I mean, I really think rather than trying to make a decision every time expulsion matter comes up, whether it's at this level or this level. To have that debate amongst you and to reach a consensus, to me, is a very professional way to ferret out, determine, and implement what the community thought should be.
So what do many school districts do? I saw the list from Floyd,
Yeah.
which is pretty extensive and pretty thorough. Let's say we think that's like an exhaustive list that's maybe unnecessary here. Any recommendation on how to go about discussing how we might look at breaking that down into different, so that the administration would have an understanding of, oh,
Right.
this falls in this thing.
Yeah, I have two recommendations. The first recommendation is that the way we would typically do some drafting is to identify examples of a category of conduct. In other words, the best way to describe what should be considered under this category are going to be a series of examples. Not trying to peg each sentence of your code of conduct. My second comment is I would think you start with what are the absolutes that we believe this community would determine that warrant removal from educational services. And then I think you can also spend the time and fairly easily define what you think are, pardon my words, but it's the easiest thing I can think of right now, a slap on the wrist type of conduct. I think those two ends of the spectrum can be fairly easily described, and then you fold into gradations and examples.
Thank you. Further questions from the board for Dean?
My question would be fairness. Fairness for all. One gets a slap on the wrist and the other gets harsh punishment.
Well, I mean, fairness has to be a component of the policy. But I'm not suggesting that the same conduct results in a slap on the wrist for one person and an expulsion or some sort of suspension for another person. In other words, rather than maybe using the word fairness, I would encourage the use of the words consistency